It happens to me every morning.
One night, I was in a vast forest. Except it wasn't exactly me. The forest was just beginning, and it was difficult to tell where I stopped and the forest began. The forest was sprouting and growing and branching into infinite complexity. But then, imperceptibly slowly at first, and then so fast I could barely notice, the forest started to grow in on itself. I became aware of my face, my head lying on the pillow, the sun shining in through the window. Oh, here I am, awake.
Principia Sutra, Pilot Episode 0, Waking Up.
13.7 billion years ago, time flowed out from the center of eternity. Being began. Emptiness was created. Before time began, think about that for a moment. Before time began, there were no distinctions between things. Everything and nothing were intertwined. It would be a mistake to say that nothing existed before the Big Bang. Everything existed too, it just couldn't be differentiated from nothing. Except also existence didn't exactly exist yet, so... In any case, at some point time started, and since then it's been possible to measure just how much of it has passed by. 3.7 billion years of it have passed. In the early time, stars started to flicker on and colossal galaxies formed. When those first stars grew old and died, some of them exploded, and from their decaying bodies, new stars formed, along with rocky planets made from materials that hadn't existed before, created in those first supernova explosions. 4.6 billion years ago, our sun was formed, and with it the planet that we are made from, Earth. About 4 billion years ago, some molecules formed, likely on the edge of ocean vents, that had the remarkable ability to replicate themselves. Life was born. Around 3.6 billion years ago, those molecules had taken on the strategy of banding together into membrane-informed groups, the first bacterial cell. These cells lived independently for a while, but then, around 2 billion years ago, they too started banding together. They symbiotically absorbed each other and created the first eukaryotic life. A billion years later, yet another merging occurred, this time producing complex multicellular life, animals, plants, and fungi. These groups grew and diversified and colonized the land. 500 million years ago came the first fish and land plants. 400 million years ago came the first seeds and insects. 130 million years ago, those insects and seeds teamed up, producing flowers and fruit to feed the pollinating animals and ensure the survival of the plants. Skipping forward a little bit, around 200,000 years ago, something truly revolutionary occurred: symbolic language. For the past 4 billion years, life had been recording and transmitting information about itself through the genetic language of DNA. This language was effective, but slow. Evolutionary change literally took eons. Symbolic language took the already accelerating pace of evolution to a whole new level. For the first time, thoughts occurring in the mind of one individual could be effectively transferred into the mind of another, just as I'm doing now. We passed down learned wisdom and became aware that we had selves. Around 10,000 years ago, another incredible merger occurred: agriculture. Agriculture was like the symbiosis between insects and plants 130 million years ago, but amplified. Humans took control of the entire plant's reproductive process and altered it to suit their needs. The plants changed. They produced bigger seeds and became dependent on humans to grow them. And we became dependent on the plants in turn. The larger seeds produced a surplus, and cities grew up around that surplus, full of specialists who had enough to eat that they could afford to spend their time developing innovations that were not strictly agricultural. One of those innovations occurred 6,000 years ago: written language. Writing allowed ideas to be transferred between people who had never met, who were separated by insurmountable distances of space and time. It allowed for the transmission and preservation of culture, the likes of which the world had never seen. It is said that God gave the Holy Hebrew language to Abraham, but it is no coincidence that Judaism and written language evolved at roughly the same time and place. The past 6,000 years has seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth of all the major world religions, and an unprecedented growth of human population. Each generation knows a little bit more about itself and the world around it than the one before it. Just 326 years ago, Sir Isaac Newton published his Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy. The Principia was one of the first successful attempts to quantize the natural world, to measure it and prove that it obeyed mathematical laws. The Principia massively expanded our understanding of the world, and within it were the seeds of a revolutionary methodology. This methodology emphasized logic and evidence-based reasoning, and would only accept objectively verifiable facts as truth. Newton called it natural philosophy, but today it is called the scientific method. We have learned more about the natural world in the past 300 years than we have in the entire rest of recorded human history. 300 years is a blink of an eye on evolutionary timescales. Compared to the age of the universe, it's not really even measurable. And yet, it's been barely over 100 years since the invention of the car and the airplane. My grandmother was born into a house without electricity. I remember a time without the internet. And yet now, I can't imagine a world without it. The internet has allowed us to know and communicate with ourselves in a way that was never before possible. We are becoming aware of who we are and our place in the cosmos. Around 2,500 years ago, a man named Siddhartha sat meditating under a Bodhi tree. A woman saw the Buddha and was struck by the aura of wisdom that surrounded him. She went up to him and said, "Are you a god?" The Buddha shook his head no. "Then are you a man?" "No." "Then who are you?" "I am awake," the Buddha replied. 13.7 billion years ago, the universe began. Except, it wasn't exactly the universe. The cosmos was just beginning, and it was difficult to tell where everything stopped and nothing began. A vast forest of possibilities was sprouting and growing and branching into infinite complexity. Then, imperceptibly slowly at first, and then almost too fast to notice, the forest started to branch back on itself. Molecules became aware of themselves and started to self-replicate. Words, writing, and culture evolved in the blink of an eye. We became aware of the sky, the sun shining up from above, the feeling of grass on our feet. Oh, here we are, awake. The history of life can be told as a story of increased self-awareness. A story of symbiotic mergers and the blending and defining of boundaries of self. We are the medium through which the cosmos can know itself. The universe is waking up.